The biggest lies about Tudor England. You still believe almost everything you think you know about Tudor England, the velvet and the codpieces, the black teeth and the burning witches, is either exaggerated, gobbled, or flat out invented by someone who never actually lived there. Tonight, we hold a candle to the biggest lies about Tudor England and find out what was really going on behind all that ruffled linen. Lie number 1. Everyone died by age 30. You wake up somewhere in your late 30s, and the internet has assured you that in Tudor terms, you should already be a fond memory. Everyone knows the average life expectancy back then was about 30, right? Here is the twist. Nobody prints on the sad little infographics. That number is being dragged into the gutter by heartbreaking infant mortality. If you survived the gauntlet of childhood, you had a very reasonable shot at your 50s, your 60s, even your 70s. The village was full of wrinkled, opinionated old people who remembered 3 months ago. Imagine 2 babies. One dies before its first birthday. The other life to a grand and creaky 70. Add those together. Divide by 2. And the modern calculator smugly announces an average of 35, despite the fact that not one person actually died at 35. The scary number is not a typical lifespan. It is the bruise left behind by all those tiny graves. So, no, you would not have been ancient at your age here. You would have been a perfectly ordinary adult with decades still ahead of you. Lie number 2. Tudor people never washed. The story goes that Tudor people were walking compost. Heaps who bathed once at birth, once at marriage, and once reluctantly on the way to the grave. It is mostly nonsense. People wash their hands and faces daily, often more than once, and they were weirdly obsessed with clean linen. A fresh white shirt against the skin was doing the job we now hand to the shower, quietly wicking away sweat and grime. Wealthy houses had bathtubs, sweetened water, and herbs. Nobody here thought stinking was a virtue. A person reeking of stale sweat was gossiped about here exactly as they would be in your office. Sweetness of breath and body was taken as a sign of health and good character. Full immersion in a tub was rarer. Yes, but heating enough water to fill a wooden tub was a genuine project involving buckets, fire, and time. So a proper soak was a treat, not a routine. They simply did it with cloth and cold water and rose water instead of a power shower. Line number 3. Everyone had black, rotting teeth. Sugar was breathtakingly expensive, which meant the peasants chewing coarse bread and vegetables actually had fairly sturdy teeth. If a little worn down, the people with the truly catastrophic mouths were the rich, who could afford mountains of imported sugar and treated it like a personality trait. In fact, the most famous set of black teeth in the whole century belonged to Queen Elizabeth herself. And here is the part that should break your modern brain because black teeth signaled wealth. Some fashionable people who could not actually afford much sugar blackened their teeth on purpose to look like they could. Picture faking tooth rot as a flex. It turns out is eternal and profoundly stupid in every single century. Line number 4. Tudor people were tiny. You duck through a doorway and conclude that Tudor people must have been the size of garden gnomes. In reality, the average Tudor adult was only an inch or two shorter than you, and plenty of them would look you dead in the eye. The doorways were low to keep the heat in and the building materials down, not because the population was pocket-sized. The beds looked short, partly because people often slept propped up on bolsters, and partly because the fancy surviving ones were showpieces. When archaeologists actually measure the bones, the average Tudor man stood somewhere around 5'7".
The average woman, a little over 5'2".
Only modestly shorter than today. Henry VIII reportedly stood around 6'2", towering over his court. Nobody discovered him as a freakish giant. He was just a tall guy in a room of normal-sized people. Line number 5. Everyone wore drab, gray clothing. Picture Tudor England, and your brain probably renders everything in the color of wet cardboard. A whole nation of mud-colored peasants shuffling around under gray skies. That flat, joyless palette is a costume drama invention and a hangover from the Puritans who came stomping along later. Real Tudor streets were loud with color. Even ordinary people loved a good red, a warm russet, a cheerful blue, whatever dye they could get their hands on. The rich, meanwhile, were absolute peacocks, dripping in scarlet, deep black, and glinting gold thread. Dye was old technology and widely available. Madder gave you reds and warm oranges. What gave you blues? Wilt gave you sunny yellows. Even a working person's wool tunic could be a perfectly cheerful shade. Looking drab was no podis o. Line number 6. Tudor England burned witches constantly. The truth is, Tudor England was not the great witch-burning hellscape of popular imagination. Witchcraft was a crime, yes, but executions were relatively rare compared to what came later under the Stuarts. Most cases involved neighborhood disputes, not dark Sabbaths. Tudor authorities were actually quite skeptical compared to their successors. The real frenzy of witch hunting arrived after the Tudor period ended. Line number 7. Everyone married at 12. You have been told that Tudor people married as children, and that girls were wed off at 12 to men old enough to be their grandfather. The reality was far more sensible. While the law permitted marriage at 12 for girls and 14 for boys, actual marriage ages were much higher. Most people married in their mid to late 20s, after years of working and saving. The child bride was an aristocratic exception, not the rule, used to seal political alliances among the elite. The quiet, sensible masses marrying in their late 20s after years of saving left far fewer traces in the record and so vanished from the story. Line number 8. Tudor women were powerless. You have been told that a Tudor woman was little more than furniture in a bonnet, silent, powerless, and owned outright by whichever man happened to be standing nearby. The full picture is far more interesting. Yes, the law was heavily stacked against them, but women ran households that were essentially small businesses, brewed and sold ale, managed farms, worked as midwives and healers, joined guilds, ran shops as widows, and wielded enormous quiet influence over money, marriage, and reputation, and presiding over the entire country for much of the era were two queens ruling in their own right. A Tudor household was not a place where the woman sat decoratively. She was the operational engine of daily life. Line number 9. They believed the earth was flat. Nobody with any education in Tudor England believed the earth was flat. The spherical earth had been established knowledge since the ancient Greeks. Every educated person, every navigator, every scholar at Oxford or Cambridge knew the world was a globe. Columbus did not prove the earth was round. He just miscalculated its size and got lucky. There was a continent in the way. And finally, line number 10. Nobody could read or write. Literacy was not universal, but it was far from zero. By the end of the Tudor period, a significant portion of the population could read. Protestant reformers had pushed for English language Bibles, so ordinary people could read the Word of God for themselves. Printed books were everywhere. Pamphlets, broadsides, and ballads flooded the streets. This was not a society stumbling around in illiterate darkness. It was a society falling in love with the written word. So the next time someone confidently tells you that nobody in Tudor England lived past 30, never washed, and believed the earth was flat, you will know better. The past was not a simple, grim cartoon. It was complicated, colorful, and full of people who were far more like us than we care to admit.